Well, thank you everyone for joining. I'm pleased to announce that Elite has partnered with a company called Simplified Logic, and they have a lot of exciting products that work with Creo for automation. The one we're going to be talking about today is Nitro BOM. So I'll let David, of course, tell you more about that, but I'll give you just a quick intro. I think most of you are probably fairly familiar with Elite, but just a quick overview of us. We are part of the Elite Aerospace Group, a manufacturing company primarily in aerospace, but we also have our engineering services division. That's the group that I work in. We are a PTC partner, so we are a reseller and provider of services related to PTC products. And of course, we are using all of those in our own company. So in our manufacturing facility, we are using those same software and tools as all of you, hopefully. So kind of quickly what that looks like. That means kind of basic implementation, but also, the architecture and consulting, everything that goes along with all of the various products that you see listed on the bottom, all of PTC's tools, which are MathCAD, ThingWorx, Windchill, Creo, and Vuforia. So today we're going to be talking about Creo and actually that middle box that you see, CAD automation. David, who I'll introduce in just a moment, is going to be showing us the Nitro BOM tool. So again, there are plenty of other tools that Simplified Logic has, and I do encourage you to check those out, but we're just going to dive into the one today. And just to let you know, we've got a few other of these webinars coming up. On June 25th is one that is about the secure cloud for PLM. And then we're still putting a couple together, but ones in the works will be covering MathCAD worksheets, the Creo Intelligent Fastener extension, and then also a little bit of an explanation of where PLM fits in the business. I like to refer to it as the alphabet soup of PLA, three-letter acronyms. So I'll be sending out information about those in the future. So I'd like to introduce David Bigelow from Simplified Logic. They, again, are a company that we've recently partnered with. They've got plenty of different tools, but the one we'll talk about today is probably their most popular one, which is focused on bidirectional Creo to Excel bill of materials automation. So with that being said, David, I will pass the presentation over to you.
Okay.
And feel free to take it away.
Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I'm just going to go through a handful of slides here, and we'd like to thank Elite for coordinating the webinar today. We're just going to get into some very high-level things, but then we're going to kind of deep dive pretty quickly into the tool because it is very easy to use, and it's used in multiple cases for different size companies and different applications, and everybody has kind of their own needs and benefits. So we're going to cover not just the basics of the tool, but why it's there, why it's important, and then also maybe kind of touch on some other more interesting use cases for how it could be integrated with the enterprise to keep things in sync. But before we get into that, I want to cover a few basic things. Number one, what is a bill of materials and what is BOM data? Most people have kind of grown out of the old philosophy of just structure and quantity type of relationships. But to our surprise, even to this day, we still get questions about extracting data off of prints and working with them in the wrong ways. BOM data is really, it's not about structure and quantities anymore. It is everything to the process. So it typically starts with what defines a part item, and then how is it going to kind of propagate out of the CAD environment through the rest of the organization, all the way down to a customer in many cases. Many of the BOM failures we see typically result in these things, which I'm sure we can all somewhat identify with to a certain degree. We've all seen situations where incorrect purchases have been made, incorrect manufacture has been done, incorrect builds, late deliveries, and of course the worst of the worst is increased warranty costs. These all are very avoidable if the data is correct up front, and that is a huge challenge, especially when you're kind of working with a very one-to-one relationship between the user and the data that they're working with in the CAD system. So that's part of why Nitro BOM was created, was to try to make that process a little bit easier and a little bit more agnostic so that it could be viewed, modified, and updated very quickly. And Excel is the choice that we made because everybody knows Excel and everybody uses Excel. The most common solution to these problems is pretty much just get the job done and fix it downstream, typically in the PDM, PLM, ERP, or RP environments. The problem with that is, yeah, it gets it out the door, but it typically kills the traceability of problems when they come up later in stream, with a lot of time wasted trying to backtrack when did new information enter into the equation of a part's life. And it may have occurred in a PLM system, or it might have just been ad hoc entered into the ERP system. And there's just a complete disconnect between what's actually being ordered and what's actually being viewed relative to what was actually in the CAD system and ended up on the drawings or the model-based definition that's been published. The most common struggles we see are really in two key areas. One of them is the changing standards and requirements, meaning the failure to keep item data current. And then the other big area that we're seeing over the last 10 years or so is just moving from that print-centric approach to data and the creation of data to more of a data-centric model, which is we need to feed it, get it as high quality as possible up front, and then let it flow through the system for consistency. When we're talking about failure to keep the standards current, basically this is a problem for mainly companies that have been using CAD for a longer period of time. But most people, when they start using 3D CAD systems and start getting into PLM and so on and so forth, they typically focus on what they used to do before and keep the information in the models to a bare minimum. So what used to start off with like 5 to 10 parameters per model or assembly, today we're seeing it's not unusual to see 50 to 100 plus parameters associated with a model. All of that data is very important, and it's becoming much more tightly integrated to the enterprise, meaning it's got to be correct up front, otherwise the downstream processes suffer. The biggest problem we see is just that inability to kind of go back and fix old things. So when we start getting into item reuse scenarios where old designs are being copied forward and then modified to create a new variant, sometimes the data is just not updated to the current standards because it's a very tedious task, especially when you're dealing with quite a few models in an old assembly or something or even old library parts that just need to be brought forward and used to today's standards. The transition panes really is broken into two areas. Number one is kind of the print-centric approach to modeling. This, to our surprise, is still occurring to this day. We just got an email about it the other day, where people are still kind of viewing the print as the master, meaning that's what we generate. We generate drawings, that's what comes out of engineering, and then it's thrown into purchasing or into manufacturing, and then they kind of deal with it and then work with the data on their own. Unfortunately, those processes, or companies that still kind of embrace that process, still they work on the bills of materials on the assemblies for prints typically. They make sure that that's as correct as possible, and then they literally either try to export the table out of Creo or copy and paste it in some way, or run a report of some type to get it into a text file, and then they spend the rest of their time kind of either manually transcribing that information into ERP, balancing it, making sure it's correct. Both systems are as close as possible. And typically, that's where a lot of the fixing occurs, where the ERP descriptions for what things are might have changed, and the models, the assemblies, and the notes associated with all those on the drawings need to be updated. So kind of the joke is that, the print is our master and data entry is our second job, because the larger the assemblies, the more tedious work is involved to kind of move that data into the next system. Most of the companies we're working with and we're trying to guide towards is really more of a data-centric model, which is focused on the data first, and the prints are really second. The drawings are still kind of a needed thing. Model-based definitions picking up a lot of speed over the last probably 5 to 6 years or 7 years or so. But really the whole point of this is to focus on what is the company you buy as raw materials, fasteners, standard purchase components, things like that. Feed that information into the parameters and values associated with the parts and assemblies as early as possible, and then go from there. Because if that data is actually put in correctly, it's a lot easier to get the bill of materials out and make sure it's in sync for anywhere else it's going to be used downstream. across the enterprise or even all the way out to customers in some cases. This is a kind of a difficult thing for companies to do, and when we look at companies that have distributed engineering resources around the country or world, sometimes keeping this in sync is very painful, especially when you're dealing with different units or you're dealing with different maybe locales for what can be bought, like especially in raw materials. The raw material names and options may be different in Europe than they are in the United States, but it still comes down to it has to be identified early so that no matter where the CAD data goes, because that flows very freely these days between facilities and manufacturing organizations around the world, it has to be consistent and it has to be as accurate as possible. Some of the common pain sources we see are really just inconsistency, meaning different users produce different results, and then inaccuracy within that process. So missing parameters, values, just inconsistency in how things are typed or entered manually by individuals. So for example, a weldment is not really a weldment if it's not spelled correctly, and sometimes that can create problems downstream. Or just a mistyping of what a parameter name is, where somebody manually enters it, can cause a lot of headaches within the bill of materials and everything else that's attached to it. Another big issue also is just the translation of data. Sometimes the engineering parameters that are chosen and have been around for a long time are not typically what the ERP system needs. So if you have a particular name like drawn by or designer or engineer in engineering for a particular parameter that may not exist within the ERP system or the MRP system, or the value is completely different, meaning it's a shortened, truncated version of something else that is actually what the information is that's needed, and it's not really just kind of limited to there isn't a one-to-one relationship there. The other big issue is just the manual process. So it's very difficult today, and it has been for a long time, to manually extract data out of the CAD system and get it into a usable format. Everybody runs to Excel because that's where they feel the most comfortable typically. And that's what's passed around and for reviews and everything else for the most part. So extracting that data is always been a little bit of a challenge, and the time to review it and to make sure that it's correct and in sync with other systems. And then also the time to go and change it. You know, sometimes when you're dealing with a 2,000 part assembly and you've got 30% of the work needs to be fixed across, 100 different parameters within that stack up of parts or assemblies, it's a very time consuming process to make sure it's correct. So this is part of why we built Nitro BOM. It came out of our own frustration years ago from doing these things manually, and we try to come up with a very generic tool. A lot of it's been customer driven on feedback as to what it needs to do and what features it needs to have. So we really focused on trying to address the consistency issue up front, making sure that any user at any time could get their head around what's going on with the structure that they have before them and be able to modify or update it with ease. Of course, when you're in Excel, you can see things a lot clearer than you can hunting and pecking through the CAD systems menus for different parameters and values, or going through the time of setting up tableized views of data within the model tree. So finding gaps is very easy in the data, meaning if there's a missing parameter or an incorrect value, it usually stands out pretty well, especially also if it's in an incorrect format. So if the data type of a particular parameter is changed, from one model to the next, it stands out like a sore thumb within Nitro BOM because we flag those types of differences as we go. The data translation is also another key thing that we focused on. We realized that a lot of the data that comes out of the CAD system, if a company doesn't have a PLM system that's fully integrated with the rest of the enterprise, sometimes they've just got to get the data out and pass it over to the next department as a CSV file or an Excel file for them to import. And that has to be as clean as possible and easy to get and to organize and structure. So that also is another key benefit of Nitro BOM, is it kind of includes the ability to map parameters from the CAD system to wherever you want to go very, very easily. And the other big ones is just the ability to kind of do a mass extraction of the data, do a visual verification of it, and then do mass imports and updates kind of on the fly. One of the other big benefits of Excel, and this is something that some people know about and some people don't know about. It's kind of our pro tip, is that it has really turned into a much more capable piece of software over the last 10 to 15 years. There's this thing that not many people know about. It's called Power Query. It may have been popped up in the past, but the more and more we've looked at it over the past several years, and the more we've been able to do with it to try to advise customers on how to connect, like, to the ERP system to get the current raw materials list or the current fasteners list and bounce that off of the bill of materials that's coming out of Creo to make sure things are in sync, and then push the data into Creo so that everything is as clean as possible, is often a bit of a struggle. Some people have typically thought that they had to go to the IT department and have a custom report written and then get that in the CSV format, make sure it's imported correctly, and go through a lot of hassle to kind of sync it together. But we found that Power Query really makes that process very, very straightforward when you want to pull data from other systems and then basically synchronize it with the CAD data's BOM and push it back into Creo. So it's one of those best kept secrets in Excel. So with that, I think we'll just jump in and kind of play with it here. So let me pull up a different. Give me just a second to change over here. Okay, wait a minute. Stop sharing that. And then we'll go over here. So I assume you can see my Windows machine here. So what you're looking at here is just a very basic assembly. It doesn't have a lot of complexity to it. It has some depth to it, but this is just something that we grabbed off the internet as an example to start with. And over here we have Nitro BOM. So Nitro BOM has several different reporting options. You can basically turn them on and off as you go. And we're going to leave everything on for right now so we can kind of go through it. And then you do have more controls over how you want the information presented. So for example, if you want to drop the file extensions so that you don't have that to worry about in the bill of materials, or if you want to disable the headers, or you want to customize like how the leveling of things are displayed, all that is very controllable through the application. You can start with any Excel file. So you can append data to an existing file, or you can create a new one if you want. So I've just started off with this very simple, just kind of empty worksheet here. And then I have another worksheet that we'll talk about later, which has maybe some tracking data in it that was pulled together, as an example, just to kind of identify other attributes from other systems that might be of interest relative to this BOM. To export the bill of materials, all you need to do is just identify the file that you want to write to and press the export button. Now we're just taking all of the standard default settings for the applications that are here, and is already grabbed the information out of Creo, and it is written it to Excel, and it's informed us that everything is complete. Now, this actually generates information in several ways right off the bat. The first report that you see here is what we call a full BOM. It's basically everything reported once, regardless of the quantity. So if there are two of the same item in here, like you can see there's two items here, it's reporting the count of two in the structure because it's not compressing it at all. But it at least gives you an idea of what's here, what's being applied, what's not. And then the full summary BOM is the same report. It's just compressed with the quantities of each item that's in the bill of materials within the CAD structure. And then the summary BOM is basically a breakout of each subassembly with the quantities of each item that are in it. And then the total components is basically a roll-up of every component and the total count across the entire structure. So these sets of reports that are here are pretty much what everybody's looking for right off the bat. I need either a full a summary of the stuff. I need breakouts of each assembly, or I need just a total components count. And I need to have that at my fingertips quickly. The other report that's here is something called an all params report. Now, the all params report, what it does, it's actually one of the main reasons that people purchase Nitro BOM. And the reason for it is this is the sheet that shows us every model in the assembly reported once, and then every parameter in each model reported once, and then the cross-up of the two is the values for that particular model and the particular parameters that's there. Now, this is actually a very, very handy worksheet because it's from here that we can actually make changes and export things. So I noticed that I had a parameter map turned on, so I'm going to clear this because we're talking about this in a second. I'm going to re-export this and show you kind of a more complete view of the parameters that are here. So when this all params report gets exported, it gives me every parameter and every value that's out here. So for example, if I wanted to come in and make a mass change to things, for example, let's say that SW made the drawing changes, or made all these changes from right to here to here. Let's say DV made these changes from here to here. The only thing I have to do is just flag which models I want to modify, and I can be a little bit liberal with it. I don't have to be super exact in my drawdown there. But once I have that, all I have to do is just press the Import Changes button, and it'll take that all params report that's there, look for every model that I wanted to change, and as you can see here, it's already made all the changes, and it's updating the report for me based on those adjustments. So as you can see just that quickly, we've been able to update all of these changes very, very quickly. Another nice thing about this too is if we want to add in a brand new parameter, we can do that very easily here. So if I want to add a string parameter in, I'll put this at a test. Let's say 01, and we'll just drag this down, go all the way to the bottom on this, and then we'll just flag all of these items as something that needs to be adjusted. So we'll go back to our main application interface and say import these changes, and it's going to go and add all of the parameters that we've just instructed it to every model that's out there based on the values that are there, and then just refresh the report so that we can see where things are at. So if we go to one of these models here and just take a look at the parameters that are in here, you can see that there's my test parameter for this particular model. If we pick a different model like this one here, we can see that it in fact updated that also. You could also use this to change the designation of a parameter also. So to do that, you would just need to simply add in a comment or a note to a cell. And if we modify these, copy and paste this down, and I'll just flag this group of changes here, and we'll import those changes, and we'll see that we've just designated that parameter. Now, I've shown you kind of creation and modification of things, but there's also another couple very powerful things you could do with this. I'll show you just a few more because I know we're kind of running a little bit tight here. So these are the parameters that we've obviously designated, but we can also delete parameters too. So if we say I want to delete parameters, and I want to, let's say, just get rid of a handful here, and maybe we'll just grab a couple of them here. So in this particular case, when we import the changes, it's going to evaluate what needs to change, make the adjustments that are necessary, and we can watch it. It's already completed all those tasks, and now it's just refreshing our report. And you'll notice here that it's giving us a gray box. It's indicating that these models do not have any parameter or value associated with them. If a parameter was missing, it would just be a white box. So for example, if it didn't have a value but the parameter existed, it would be empty. And then one last thing I want to show you that I think is really, really kind of handy with this tool is also the ability to kind of rename models. So if we type in a keyword up here for rename, and we'll call this model 01, we'll just go rename first few of them here. I'll put just an X in here. You can put any kind of text you want. And you'll notice as I press the import button here that the tree will update as those changes are made too. Now, this can also rename drawings that are associated with it as long as they're the same name. So if there's something missing within a file name or something that wasn't able to be renamed, it'll tell you. But fundamentally, just that quickly, we've been able to make quite a few changes in just a few minutes worth of effort. Now that we've made these adjustments, we can actually come in and do a couple other nice things. We can say, well, maybe I don't want all of the parameters to be exported in all of my reports that are here. So I'm going to tell it to go grab all of the current parameters that are in the model. And maybe there's just a handful of parameters that I'm interested in. So maybe I want to get rid of these, and maybe I want to slide these up in the list. And maybe I don't care, maybe design by actually is ENGR in the target system I'm going to. Let's say that material is another name like MATL. And let's say finish is actually FIN in my ERP system. And let's say that we don't need modeled by or checked by. Well, actually, let's just get rid of that. We'll say modeled by. Let's get rid of that one too. And let's see. I guess I have to put in. Get rid of that. Okay. So when we've made these adjustments, we've pruned down our kind of list and reorganized it. We can actually export this now. We can say I want to include this parameter map. And when I export this, it's going to update all of the reports that are coming out. It's going to reduce the amount of data that's presented. So when this is finished, you'll notice that we have less content, and it's also translated the outputs to other names. From this point forward, we've got something that, very quickly we can just export or hand off to the next department to kind of load or do something with quite easily. As I said earlier, you can also drop off the skeleton, or drop off the file extension names. So typically those aren't needed for the report. And also there are some additional options where you could say I may need a parent column in my first bill of materials. So I'll just go ahead and include that, and it will actually show me the structure of what this is, but also show me the parent-child relationships of those in that one report that we just exported, which is here. So it shows me the component, what its parent is, and also the indented structure, what's there. That's pretty. I know we're running a little bit long on time here. Stuart, did you have anything else you wanted to cover?
I think that's certainly the majority of it. I think if anyone has any questions, now would be a great time. You can either put them in the chat session or feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. And Dave, if you had anything else you want to show, I'll let you know if we do get any questions. But
yeah, I can show
at the moment.
I could show one quick thing. As I said earlier, that there is the ability to kind of synchronize data. So, for example, let's say that I wanted to modify. Well, let's say one question is, what happens if the structure changes, right? So I'm going to just grab a handful of these items and just reorder them, and this happens quite a bit, right? So sometimes things just get shifted around, or they get moved because the structure has changed. And the common question is, well, what happens then? Well, this is the beauty about Nitro BOM. It's really just a re-export of the current structure, and you've got the latest updated information just that quickly. So it is it's quite handy. We've enjoyed it as a tool, not just for our own use, but also we have quite a few customers that are finding it handy. One thing that I will tell you is that you do have the ability, for example, on a corporate installation, you can load it on a shared network drive, or you can distribute it amongst the different desktops if you want. But you can also set up what we call like a sub file. It's very similar to like a Creo sub file, which kind of has predefined settings. So if you have a predefined standard for how information is to be exported or how it's to be presented to different users, you could do that very easily just by coming up with a corporate standard, saving it off, and then people can use that setting all the time. They can also have their own settings for their preferences also. Let me take off a couple more things here. Let's take off level waving, and let's go ahead and not worry about formatting the wave, and let's maybe drop the header too. So this will give you an idea of just getting away from the kind of the extra information that we put into the Nitro BOM reports to get it down to more of something what people are fairly typically used to seeing, which would be something like this. So in this case, we've got a report that's showing us the parent, the child, the description, a few different pieces of information here, and the translated data for the next system that may receive this, or we may want to merge with or use in some way. For example, like with Power Query to do updates and then push it back into Creo. So with that, I think that pretty much kind of covers the majority of it.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a good lead-in. So you can see from this report, it's more just data. It's not as much formatting, so it definitely works better for integration to something else,
Yes.
which brings up a question someone asked, which is there a way to integrate the Excel BOM into SAP?
Yes. So SAP is, I believe, an Oracle-based system. So if you have the correct permissions to get a connection to SAP and have the correct permissions for the type of tables you're looking for, you can actually use Power Query within Excel, which is right up here under the Data tab, to say I want to create a new connection from a database, and just identify the SQL server as to where it's coming from, and then from there you can actually work with the Excel data that was extracted from the Creo BOM and compare it to what's going on there, and run some queries and pull some some new reports together, and then push those results back into Creo if you want to. We actually have one customer that does that quite often with their raw materials and fasteners. So they will extract the structure for what they need, and then they will go fill out the rest of the data based on what the ERP system has to kind of back populate the CAD system. It saves them a lot of time.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. All right, well, I don't see any other questions. That was certainly a really good one. As far as is it unique to SAP, obviously, no. Once you have it in Excel, that can be your source to go into any other table structure. So, yeah,
Yep.
As Dave mentioned, SAP is Oracle-based, but if you have a SQL database, the same would be true, of course.
Yeah, or even just a text file. I mean, it's the one thing about Excel that's really matured over the years is the ability to kind of interface with different systems quite easily and allow you to keep focus on the data that's before you without having to jump through different environments and different languages to get there.
Yeah, that's maybe one of the beauties of Nitro BOM is that it brings everything into and out of Excel, which is probably one of the most ubiquitous tools. It can interface with everything, and everyone is familiar with it. Even just as simple as, let's say you've got a typo on a parameter, you can just do a find and replace, and in every one of these, you can update the parameter to the correct spelling of something.
Exactly.
I certainly wouldn't want to do that manually in Creo, that's for sure.
No. Well, with that, I mean, I'll turn this back over to you, but I think, again, as Stuart said earlier, we are giving out a free 30-day license for Nitro BOM to kind of play with. Just, Stuart, I believe you're going to send out an email with the details on that. But feel free to share it among, not just for yourself, but share it with anybody in your company that you think might find use in it and want to play with it. The only thing you have to do is register and request a license, and you'll be off and running.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll send out those details momentarily. And by all means, if anyone has any questions, whether it's just now after having seen the demo or after you start using the tool yourself, please feel free to contact me or David. And if you don't have David's contact, you can always send it to me, and I'll certainly include him as well. So awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Dave, thank you very much for the presentation.
No problem. Thank you so much for coordinating. Have a good day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.